Olá, sejam muito bem-vindos a mais uma entrevista ao vivo no canal Adestramento Brasil. A minha convidada de hoje é a juíza internacional FEI 5 estrelas pelos Estados Unidos, Janet Foy. Ela é autora dos livros Dressage for a No So Perfect Horse e Dressage Q&A with Janet Foy. A entrevista será em inglês. Quem quiser fazer pergunta pelo chat, é só escrever, pode escrever em português que eu traduzo, e depois eu vou fazer um resumo de tudo que foi falado aqui em uma matéria grande para o site. Okay, now I will switch to English. Thank you very much for having accepted my invitation, Janet, and welcome to Adestramento Brasil.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, so I thought about we could begin with you telling a bit more about your career. How did you end up being a five-star judge? And I don't know, the whole process until here.
Well, it's sort of an interesting story because I never really wanted to be a judge. I always wanted to be a rider because that was my passion. And there was a judge training program that was going on in my area, and they needed one more person to make 10 so they could hold the program. And I was the only other person in the area that had the riding scores to do it. So my friends talked me into doing it. And so I did the program and I passed the exam. So all of a sudden, I was a judge. Now, in our country, we have 3 levels. We have small r, which goes through second level. And then we have a large r, which goes through fourth level, which is about the medium level. And then we have a senior judge, which goes through the FEI levels. So this was just the very first level of judging through second level. But I found I enjoyed it and I liked it. And so I did quite a bit of judging because there weren't very many judges in my area. I kept riding and I kept training. Again, that was still my passion. But eventually I went on for my next exam. And eventually I went on and became a senior judge. And at that point, I thought, I'm finished. I'm done. I'm having a great time. This is fun. And my friend Lois Eukins, who was in my senior judge program, said, no, we have to be FEI judges. And I said, what is the difference? I don't understand. And she said, well, haven't you ridden in CDIs? And I said, yes, but those judges are just from a different country. They're no different. So I had no idea about the FEI judging or what was different. So Lois sort of drugged me kicking and screaming over to England, where we did our FEI candidate. It's now called 3-star, but it was a candidate program and we both passed. And so that started my process through the FEI levels. So now there's a 3-star, 4-star. Well, actually there's 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, 5-star. They've made many more levels. Which is good because a lot of countries need FEI judges, but they don't really have any big tour horses. So a lot of the riders who want to be judges have never ridden Grand Prix, but they're perfectly capable of doing the small tour. So anyway, that's just sort of how my journey began, and it just sort of snowballed from there. And eventually I was so busy traveling and judging and going all over the world, which has been wonderful. I've been so lucky to see so many wonderful, wonderful places in the world because of going to judge a horse show and then staying to do a little touring. And then I was appointed as a 5-star. That's nothing you really apply for. You just wait in the wings until you're called forward. So I'm very excited. I've judged a lot of the big shows like ACA, and I've judged the European Championships. Was supposed to have judged Tokyo. Am still hopefully going to judge Tokyo next year. But it's been totally an amazing jump from 4-star to 5-star to be able to sit in those panels and judge the top horses in the world, all of them, all at the same time. It's been amazing. It's been so much fun. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Which is more exciting? And can you point out a horse show that really caught your attention or was spectacular in some way?
Well, I think Aachen is probably one of the most spectacular shows in the world because they have um, the top horses in teams because it is a CDIO, which is a team event. And then they have another section, which is just a 4-star. So they have pretty much, it's a testing ground for most of the countries to send their teams to the European Championships and to the Olympics. So as far as the quality of the competition, it's incredible. The shopping is incredible. There's jumping, there's driving, there's eventing. There's so much to do. It's amazing. I don't know. That to me is probably, if you have a chance and you want to go to the best horse show, go to Aachen because you'll see everything.
Yeah, I was at a Word Question Games that it really caught my attention. So I'm looking forward to Aachen. Well, I guess maybe not next year, but let's see. So
yeah, well, it's on for next year, so we're keeping our fingers crossed.
As well as the Olympic. It will be your first Olympic, right?
My first Olympics, yes.
Looking super forward to it. So
I'm looking super forward to it. I'm also super nervous. I don't think the riders realize how nervous the judges are because we want to do the very, very best job. And it takes a lot of concentration because in the big championships, like the European Championships and the Olympics, there's 2 full days of Grand Prix with 35 horses each day. So that's about 70 horses. And we have to keep our standard for 2 days and super, super concentrate. And when you think about how many thousands of scores we give in those 2 days, in a way, it's not fair when the press criticizes us for one mistake. You know, nobody criticizes Isabel Worth when her horse misses the 2 tempi changes. But the judges, when we do a great job, like we did at the last Europeans, and there was no controversy and no difference, the press didn't come out and say, wow, go team, what a great group of judges. It was like, whatever. But had one of us made a big mistake, then it would have been all over the press. So that is sort of distressing in a way because we do work very, very hard. And we do take probably more criticism than the athletes do.
And before our interview, I put on Instagram and Facebook, and I received some questions. And one is regarding to that. It's judges are human and are submitted to make mistakes. So, and it affects directly to riders and combinations. How to deal with that, the pressure and the result, and how do you work on that?
Well, I think the most important thing that's happened in the last couple of years is that we have these wonderful systems that Black Horse does, so that we get, after every competition, every single ride and every single judge's scores, as well as every single judge's comments. And we're able to have judges meetings and go over every score, every comment. At the big championships, we have the JSP, which is the Judges Supervisory Panel, and they have been watching the competition, and they do change some of the scores, which protects the riders if there is a big mistake. For an example, at the end of the extended canter, if the flying change is late in front, several judges can't see that happen. So they may give a 7, and the other 7 judges, many of them can see it, they would have given a 4. So there, the JSP will take the score down to a 4, or the average of the scores. So in that case, the rider loses points, but it makes everything a little bit more clear. Just the same if a judge misses mistakes in the flying changes, or if the score is too low and needs to be brought up, the JSP does that. So At the championships now, I think the riders and the judges are a little bit protected with the JSP helping us along. And I think as a human, we just have to keep working. We have to keep studying. We have to keep discussing things. And at the end of the day, it's a little bit, you don't look at who the rider is. You don't look at the horse. You just a little bit let that trained reaction kick in. The more you think about it, the more you worry about it, the worse your judging is.
And what does call more judges' attention in a test? I mean, it's a super horse, or it's a more correct horse, a big mover, but not so correct. So, what calls more your attention? That a combination goes into the arena. Wow.
Well, at the end of the day, the best horse, the best athlete with the best training should win. If you have a more average horse with lovely training, it should beat the spectacular horse with bad training. We should not reward bad training.
What do you mean by bad training? I mean, you were looking for some tenses.
Horses that have their mouths open, whose necks are short, who the back is tight, the hind legs maybe aren't tracking up, too exaggerated in front. We need to look for a very correct, supple, harmonious horse that's very nicely working over their back, stretched to the bit, has a very nice contact, a closed mouth, and the rider being very quiet without obvious aids.
And you also look for the horse comforts. I mean, it's that some discomfort signs like on tail, muscles, ears. How do you take it into account? It's in each figure. It's or in the score like a whole.
No, the tension has to be more than just the tail, and also it has to be more than just teeth grinding. You know, it has to be a combination of different things. You'll see sometimes the teeth grinding the tail and the hind legs being very short. And then now we don't have collective marks anymore for the FEI. So most of those things we're talking about right now would have lowered the submission score as well, but we don't have that. So every time we see that in every movement, we will deduct points. And depending on how much we see, it will be a 0.5 or a full point deduction every time we see that evasion.
You also judge nationals in the United States. I mean, the lower levels.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do.
Can you point out as more common mistakes among amateurs? We have a very large audience at Adestramento Brasil who are riders beginning on the first, second level. So, and people are also always asking me, how can I move on? How can I become better? And how can I achieve the big tour, small tour?
I think there's a couple of things that's pretty prevalent with most, and it's not just the amateurs, it's also the juniors, it's also the open riders. The one thing is accuracy. I call that losing stupid points. Don't go in and not know where a 20-meter circle is. Don't go in and not use your corner. Don't go in and do the movement at the wrong place. So being accurate is very important. Using your corners is very important. We see a lot of people that never bend one direction or the other. And even at training level, the horse should have a little bit of bending. And we should be able to see the rider starting to create lateral suppleness in the horse. So improve your bending, improve your accuracy, your corners. And then lastly, another thing we very rarely see is good downwards transitions after lengthenings or after medians or after extensions. The riders do the first one and they just sort of cruise past the letter. They never really show a transition back to collection. So those are sort of probably the highlights of where people throw points away.
And you were saying very basic things. I mean, that
Yeah.
you need to show on the first test. I mean, people keep doing that. I know I do, but people keep doing that on, I don't know, fourth level and go on.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, once you've gotten to second level, the riders need to understand it's not about doing the tricks or the movements. It's about creating a different balance in the horse. The horse has to start to be more compressed. Horse has to start to carry more weight and come more uphill. So the outline and the balance of the horse is going to change. And we see here in the US a lot of horses in a first level balance with a double bridle doing third level because the horse does a flying change. And at this point, once you're in third level and up, you have to realize it's not just teaching the horse the movements that creates, I have a fourth level horse. You have to have the correct balance. You have to be able to show that pendulum from collected to median, back to collected, to extended, back to collected, without the horse falling downhill and losing the balance or running. It also you also need a higher degree of lateral suppleness at those levels. So for me, the biggest problem there is riders not understanding how the horse is supposed to look, how the physique of the horse is supposed to develop and how the balance. And so they struggle then with doing third level, fourth level, pre St. George. They really struggle and they have trouble with the test because it's hard for them if they're not in that correct balance.
And we see some combinations jumping, skipping some levels, right? Like you said, I'm on the first level and my horse does flying change, so I'm just skipping to the third level. Which is the importance for going level to level, or it's not important at all?
Well, I always tell my students, and I learned this 30 years ago when I was taking lessons from very important people, that you need to have a very, at least back then the scores were lower, but today I would say you at least need 4 or 5 scores of 65% at the highest test of the level to go to the next level. If you're only scoring 62%, that means you're satisfactory. So it's like getting a C in school. And most parents would not be happy if their children only got C's in school, right? So if you're only satisfactory, you're not really ready to go up to the next level. So I would say 65 is good because then you're between satisfactory and fairly good. And then once you can achieve that 5 times at the highest test, then go ahead and move up.
And do you have any particular difference between levels that are most difficult to go? For example, from the first to second, the second to third, the third to fourth?
Well, yeah, I think second level is, I call it the great black hole of training. It's difficult because it's the first time you have collection. And at that level, we expect to see the collection come and go. So we talk sometimes about maybe putting in the test, enter working trot, and then turn and then develop collected trot and do a shoulder in. Except the riders don't know the difference half the time. Then we'd have to teach the judges to know the difference. And it was too complicated. But it's a little bit that idea in second level. It's like the FEI 5-year-old test. We expect the collection to come and go because of the age of the horse. But we expect to see some, that we have to see some moments where the horse is carrying some weight. So I think second level is a little bit a jump for some people because they don't quite understand that collection idea. And then, of course, then when you go to third level, Now you have to be collected all the time, and you have extensions on top of that. So it's a pretty big jump. And we see a lot of people with double bridles that the horses don't have enough power, and they don't have enough coming from the hind legs to support the double bridle. So the horses just curl up and put their nose on their chest, and and then that's not what we want to see.
And talking a little bit about your book, Dressage for Not a So Perfect Horse. And people buy horses, and sometimes they are not what they expected. So how to deal with that, and how to work on improving this horse? Sometimes you cannot buy the second horses, or you cannot just change it. So what are the most tips that you can give us?
Well, I think you should buy the best horse you can, the best horse you can afford. You need to think about the canter, buy the best canter, because the canter you can't improve very much. The trot you can improve the most, and the walk really you can only ruin. A great big walk is not going to be helpful later on, because it's difficult to not let it be lateral when you start to shorten the reins and collect the walk. So buy the best canter you can. Try to buy the best, most naturally balanced horse. If the neck is really long and really low, it's going to be very, very difficult for that horse physically to be a fourth level horse and be able to carry.
To be on the high, right?
Yeah, because his neck's too low and it's too long, and he's already weighted a little bit. So buy a nice neck set, buy a good canter, and then buy the best hind leg you can. And then once you have your horse, you have to realize each one has their strengths and their weaknesses. It's like each of your children. Your children are not all alike. Some like math, some like English, some will eat Brussels sprouts, some won't, So you have to think a little bit about what your horse needs. Is the guy here?
No, but there we go, Cheryl.
All right, sorry, my husband was leaving.
That's okay.
I know, this at home stuff, Bye, dear. See you later. So once you have your horse, then with your trainer, you need to have an idea of the strengths of the horse, the weaknesses of the horse, get a training plan. How do we work on the weaknesses? How do we highlight the strengths? And then when you go to the horse show, you have to know where your horse can get 8s and where it can't. And if you try to get an 8 where it can't, you're probably going to get a 4. So, be riding at a horse show, you have to know, I should just go for a 6 here, because if I don't, I'm going to get a lower score. So each horse is different, and you just have to have a plan. And oftentimes the horse will surprise you. And I've had this happen over my lifetime many times, when I go, oh, that horse is never going to be a St. George horse. And it happens. The horse overcomes the conformation a little bit because it has such a good brain. Or, oh, this is going to be a Grand Prix horse for sure. And it never makes it because it won't do either Piaffe Passage or the one-time changes. I've had 7 horses where I could only do 2 of those 3 things. So then it's not a Grand Prix horse.
What makes a great Grand Prix horse?
Oh, I think if we talk about maybe Vallegro and Totalist, because they're both retired, they're totally different horses and totally different types of horses, but they both had so much personality and so much sparkle in the ring that you just sit there and are like drawn into that performance. And they did the same thing, I know, for the spectators, because even that little Spanish horse at the World Equestrian Games in Kentucky, people still talk about that little Spanish horse's freestyle. It was just for sure the crowd loved that. The crowd would have given him the gold medal. But you have certain horses that have just that charm and that personality, that you just, I don't know, they just sparkle.
We have a question here from the audience. I'm going to read it. So, what does work best or better? A great rider and an okay horse, or a great horse on a okay rider? If I'm of average but rich rider, may I go more far? And I lost your image.
I know. I don't know where it went. I see you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I can hear you fine. I just can't see you.
I don't know what happened. How do I make it happen?
I guess it's on your camera.
I don't know. I'm on my phone and I had a phone call. Let me try
maybe
this.
That's okay.
No, it says camera. I don't know. It says the camera's on. So I don't know why.
Yeah, it's not on the systems. I guess your camera just went off, right? Or do you want to jump off and jump in again?
Yeah, I'll come back in.
Okay, I will wait. Então, a gente está esperando a Janete, que caiu um pouco. Quem tiver perguntas e estiver acompanhando, pode mandar pelo chat do YouTube, que eu faço. Temos a volta. Agora sim. Okay, you are back.
All this technology stuff.
That's okay. It happens all the time. So, did you hear the question, or should I rephrase it?
I sort of heard it. It was about
a great horse on what work best? A great rider on an okay horse, on a okay rider on a super horse, and if I have a lot of money, which I have more chance? I think it's a very particular Brazilian question.
Yeah. I think you have to remember that in this sport, there's two athletes, the horse and the rider. And the horse is only going to be as good as the rider, because the rider's in charge of the training, and the horse's training reflects the quality of the rider. So you're always going to have a better chance having a quality rider with a more average horse than a super expensive horse with an average rider. It's very difficult, and you've seen it happen. I've seen it happen a lot where an adult amateur rider buys a top Olympic horse and they say they're going to learn on it. And then, of course, the first thing they want to do is show. And so they go to the show, and it's a 52%. It's terrible because they're not taking enough time to really learn how to ride the horse and ride the movements and ride things correctly. So it takes a long time to train a rider. It takes a long time. It takes 5 years to train a horse from 5 years old to 9 doing their first Grand Prix. So I think nobody should be in a hurry.
And talking about this improvements, you judge a lot of across Latin America. Mm-hmm. Do you see, how do you see the region, not only talking about Brazil, but the other countries, in what stage the dressage is in each country? And did you see any improvements over the years?
Oh, yes. The first time I judged in South America, most of the horses were lame in the jog. It was a long time ago. But
when was it?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. But now the quality of the horses is much better. The riding is so much better. I think there's still too many old schoolmaster types that need to be replaced with horses that the riders actually have trained themselves. And to me, that's the biggest issue. I think the riders are good enough now that they don't need to buy the old, 16-year-old trained schoolmasters and take them to the games. I think they could train their own horses and compete their own horses. And at the end of the day, that 5 or 6 years that you've put into training and getting to know your horse is so powerful. It creates such a bond. And you really notice that. You really see that in the ring. So, yes, it's improved a lot, but you still have a long way to go. We still have a long way to go in the US as well. When you go to a Europe and you judge 50 FEI ponies, and 20 of them are in the 70%, and they're these little kids riding these top ponies, that just makes you sit up and go, wow, our country doesn't have that sort of depth. And that's why the Europeans are so tough, because they have a huge chain of bringing those young riders, and those kids have ridden on teams. They've ridden for medals since they were pony riders. The little kids out there, and when they get to be, then they go through juniors, they go through young riders, they go for U25. By the time they get to the big group, they're like 5 times a team member already. And they're not nervous. They're like, here we go, let's go. So, I mean, I think that's our problem. That's the US's problem. And we're working like mad to develop the youth and children's and ponies. And we've really put our focus in that the last 10 years. And it's starting to pay off. But, we're still probably 30 years behind the Europeans. And then you're probably 20 years behind us. So,
yeah,
it's just, where do you go from here? And I mean, my opinion is you have good riders down there, and you need to buy good young horses, and you need to train them yourself and bring them along. And then the next step, of course, is to get to some Grand Prix horses so that you can be competitive at the Pan American Games.
And you judge
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Brazil did have Grand Prix horses, but a lot of the countries didn't.
Yeah, and talking about the Pan American Games, it came out again, the discussion about big tour, small tour on Pan American Games. You were then last year, so we talked to each other. So what do you think about the discussions? Do you think countries are ready to have to have this step and move everybody to the big tour, or the mix is still necessary to develop the Latin American countries, dressage?
Well, I think probably if you said everybody has to be Grand Prix, it would not be good. You'd lose countries. But I think there has to be at least one Grand Prix horse on every team, because if you don't require it, the countries are never going to do it. I mean, we've tried this half and half thing now for 8 years?
I guess so, because
yeah,
the Brazilian, yeah.
Yeah,
so I think the Pan American in Brazil already had, right? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so
I'm really not
been
sure.
Quite a few years. So it's one of those things, if you don't require it, it's not going to happen. So I don't think you need a full team, but I think you need to have one horse for sure, because then it will start to happen. People will set their goals a little bit higher. So yeah, it just, you got to kick people in the butt.
Yeah, and it should start somewhere. And I guess we will have some decisions on that on the next FEI assembly that will be virtual on November. So we are really expecting that. And you were saying about the whole development on dressage in the US. And I think it's a little bit also has to do with culture of the country, right? Brazilian has more pass on jumping than dressage, and it takes time. How should it begin? I mean, getting more children, more ponies, more amateurs to the competition.
Yeah, we started our big group with the kids in the US are hunter ponies. So the little kids out there jumping around, doing their little hunter ponies. So our goal was to try to figure out how we get those little hunter ponies over to dressage and take all those kids. And you've got all the jumper kids. We also have a ton of Western. You know, our country has huge numbers of Western, huge numbers of Arabian people. So we have a lot of people in the sport, but just in different facets of the sport. So we started doing the children's tests here and pony tests, even though we didn't have a lot of children or ponies. And we said, let's put them at the national championships. And we always take the top 12. Well, we knew we weren't going to have 12. And
sorry. I would just interrupt you just to a break so we can explain to the Brazilian audience how the nationals work. Because in Brazil, we have the state championship. It's like 1 or 2 days of competition, and that's it. And you become the gold or silver or bronze.
Okay.
And then you don't need to be classified, to selected, to qualify to the national. So you just pay your inscription of you. Well, so submit your application and you can compete. I think it is slightly different from what you have in the US, right?
Yeah, we do. We have two different things. We have what we call regional finals, which would be like your states, and those go to our final championship in Kentucky. And that's a whole different, they qualify through the regional championships. We don't have any children going to that group, and that was set up mostly for adult amateurs because they felt they were being left out of what we call our Festival of Champions. And the Festival of Champions is a national qualification. You submit a letter to our federation at the beginning of the year saying you want to qualify, then they track your scores and you go to qualifying competitions, and then we make ranking lists. And then the top 12 from each division, whether it's Grand Prix, Small Tour, Children's, Juniors, Young Riders, Ponies. We also do our Young Horse Championships at the same time, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-old. We also have what we call developing Prix-St. George and developing Grand Prix. Those are for younger horses. So we have the top 12 in each of those categories. And they're invited to come to Chicago. It's about a week-long competition. And then they're the national champion. So our country's strange. We have lots of champions because people like to win. So we have different champions for different things. And it's a little bit like, okay, they qualify in different ways. Sometimes the same champion has 2 titles, sometimes not. But anyway, that's the plan because we don't have children going to the finals. And we have the North American Young Rider Championships as well. But we want to try to include the little kids into the festival. And so far we've been doing really well. We still don't have 12 in each division, but we're inching closer. We had 9 and 10 in some of the divisions this year for the ponies and the children's. So we're pretty excited. It is starting to happen. So
we talk a lot about the development writing and writers and tests. One key part of the whole dressage thing is judging. How to improve judgments? I mean, how to make more people embrace the judging career, and how to make judges who are already judging on South American countries in Brazil better and more accurate to the scores they give. I mean, to know that the scores really it's really fair.
It's of course education and having judges forums and bringing outside FEI judges in to do courses, and whether you do them with videos and live horses, education is what helps the most. Getting people interested. We have actually very good programs here that we do. We start with what we call the L program, and it's a great program whether you're a trainer or a rider or want to be a judge. It gives a lot of information about what judges are looking for, as well as how to ride the movements, what are the important parts of the movement, what's the methodology, those sorts of things. So, you know, the thing with, we would love to have more top riders be judges, because at this point, even though the FEI has taken out the age limit, so to speak, for judges, we still in our country are very, very, a little bit nervous that we don't have senior judges. We have to have a senior judge that's been a senior judge for 3 years before we recommend them to the FEI. And basically the FEI rules say you have to be under 55 years old. So it takes a long time. It takes at least 10 years in our country. And that's if you do nothing else except judge, do your next exam, judge, do your next exam.
Janet? I can hear you. Okay, that's good.
Okay. Yeah, it takes 10 years to get from the very beginning to your senior judge. So that means you have to start when you're young. I started when I was 26, so I was young enough. I was okay. But a lot of people, you don't really make very much money judging. You make more money riding, and you make way more money teaching lessons. So it's difficult to convince some of these top riders to take the time out of their teaching and training schedule and spend 10 years to do all these programs. And then you go make less money. And when we do CDIs in Europe, we don't make anything. I mean, they don't pay us. They pay our way, they pay our hotel, our food. But we're basically judging for free.
Yeah, and it's difficult to engage people on young people, right? To that.
It is. So it's hard.
Yeah, I have some very specific judging questions that I received through Instagram and Facebook and people. So I will make it. So how do you evaluate horses that are presented 100% of the time with the nose slightly behind the vertical? For certain levels, is it more acceptable than the others?
No, it's not acceptable. We have certain horses, like the Spanish horses, who have a big crest. And basically their pole is never going to be the highest point, because the horse would be above the bit. So conformationally, it's not going to happen. So as a judge, I know that, but I also know that the FEI tells me I can't give a 10 if the pole's not the highest point and the nose is behind the vertical. So if we see a horse behind the vertical the entire time, they're probably going to lose 0.5 in every movement.
And you talk about the Spanish and Lusitano horses. Do you see they evolving, improving over the years? How do you see they on GP, on big tour?
I see the some wonderful, wonderful horses, more modern type. They're a little bit taller. They're a little bit more of a rectangle, not so square. they have a very nice front leg movement. They're not so, there was a lot of kind of deviation in the front years ago. The walks have gotten better. Unfortunately, you can have a top horse and the Spanish horse in the collected walk and the extended walk, it's 40 points. If they don't really have a lot of freedom and overstep, they're going to lose points there. And in the top competition, that it'll kill you. You've got to have at least a 7.5 in that top group. But I'm seeing a lot of really, really lovely. I saw a Lusitano the other day from the blueberry farms that I think has some in Brazil and also some in Europe, that it was a 5-year-old, and I thought it was a warm blood. It was unbelievable. Had fabulous walk, fabulous trot, fabulous canter. And I'm like, wow, that is an amazing horse. So yeah, I'm really excited that because they're so trainable and they have such good brains. I have a group that has mostly Lusitanos that I clinic. And I just love the brains. They're so trainable. So yeah, I'm really excited that the quality and the different body types and movement is really improving.
Very specific questions right now. We have 2 pirouettes on the walk, and scores are separated for the pirouettes and the walk. If the rhythm of the walk is incorrect only during the execution of the pirouette, is the score for the collected walk affected?
No.
No? You judge everything separated?
Yes. The pirouette is judged separately, and if they lose the rhythm, the score will be a 4 or a 5. But it's the same thing if you think about a half pass and trot that gets a little bit irregular. We don't put that in the trot score. We put that more that the horse is not submissive to the bend, and that's what's creating the rhythm problem. So it's a little the same thing in the walk pirouette, that the horse is losing the rhythm because of the movement, because they're losing suppleness in the movement. So that movement will get a lower score. But if the rest of the collected walk is fine, it will be not punished.
Another question here. Talking about the specific letter when you need to execute, if you lose that because you want to make a better movement, for example, how is the penalty? How the judge evaluate that?
You will lose points, but you won't lose as many points as if you try to make something happen at the letter and it's very bad. So you might lose a whole point if you try to do the movement at the letter and you have resistance, and you might lose a half a point if you're before or after the letter.
And talking, it seems really easy. How amateurs, or I don't know, I'm still telling amateurs because I guess professionals or when you were at the really high levels, you know how to deal with the all nervousness and everything. So how riders can make better decisions while in the arena? I mean, they need to think really quickly. And is there any tip to do that? So I'm going to do that instead of this, and really rational.
Yeah. Well, what I have my students do is I have them take the test, a blank test, and over where the judge would write their comments, I have them write down what they need to do to prepare for that movement. So what they would be thinking for that movement. So in other words, if I were doing a shoulder in, I would be in the corner, prepare for your bend, things like that. And then how they ride the movement, how they finish. And so I have them put 3 or 4 things in each box. Then I have them do the test on foot, repeating what they're saying to themselves. And then we do the test on the horse, and I make them talk to me in my headset and tell me what they're doing. And if they memorize that sort of thing, then they're not nervous because they're too busy already thinking about what they're supposed to be doing.
And before each movement, right?
Yeah.
And another thing that you mentioned that I think it suits really good here is to have a plan, right? To understand the horse and the horse qualities. Like I'm really good on flying chains, but I'm not so good on extended trot, and go for points on this, right?
Yes, go for the points that where you know the horse is a highlight, and then go for a safe 6 in the ones you know the horse is not loving.
Yeah. So we are going to the end of this interview. I'm curious about how will our competitions in the U.S. on this post or during pandemic, and how is all expectation about Tokyo and the team from the U.S. Can you give some color on that and comment?
Well, many competitions have been canceled. Our federation would not let any competitions happen until the beginning of June, and they put out a big COVID protocol. So the shows that decided they could follow that did shows. Those that decided they couldn't canceled. Of course, social distancing. There's plexiglass between the scribe and the judge, or often we just use headsets, and they put a car behind the judge's booth, so the judge is sitting in the booth and the scribe's in the car, and we're using the seat coach headsets, that sort of thing. Yeah, they won't let people come into the horse show office. Almost everybody is emailing the tests rather than handing out paper. There's a big use of computers now, not so much with the paper. Yeah, so we're doing what we can do and following the protocols. And so far, in dressage, there's not been a big problem with COVID and people getting exposed during the horse show. So that's been great. The hunter jumper shows have had more problems because they have multiple braiders going through the barns. And so we were able to get through our Festival of Champions, which was huge. We had 15 judges, and it went for a complete week. And we only had one person who was called by a contact tracer saying that they'd been exposed, and they never came back to the show, and their friends packed up and left. Unfortunately, that turns out that test was wrong and it wasn't positive, but she was great. She was a very good sport and left. So we've not had any problems from that great big show. They did cancel our finals because a lot of it's indoors.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, all of our CDIs had canceled. Our first CDI coming up is Tryon next month. And then there's one in California in November. The Florida circuit is still a go. Everything's outside. I'm sure they'll do something in the VIP area, which will limit, and they may limit spectators. Up till now, no spectators are allowed. Anybody who goes to the showgrounds has to have their temperature taken, and then you get a wristband. So it's been better than not having shows, but it's been strange, wearing the masks all day and trying to talk has been very hard.
And do you think there will be enough CDIs to prepare the U.S. team and to point out the combinations that will represent the country in Tokyo's Olympics?
Yeah, I think there will be. I think we'll be fine because most of ours are outdoors. It's the European ones indoors that might be the rest of the European indoor season could be a little iffy. So we'll just fingers crossed and hope we can go on. I realize that horse shows are not the most important thing going on in this world right now, but I mean, for our little world, it is important, and our little business, it is important. But it's a very strange time. Yeah, very strange time.
Yeah, so we hope it goes through quickly. So I really want to thank you so much for all the information and things that you said. I think the audience really appreciate that. I did. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. And I hope I see you all in Brazil soon.
Yeah. As soon as the trips are allowed, right?
So yes. I'm in.
It's a, yeah.
All
So
right,
it's a
everybody.
pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Você vai. Toda a entrevista, os pontos principais, vocês podem acompanhar no site Adestramento Brasil. Até a próxima.